So I'm very excited about welcoming Brandon Nott, who is the Senior Vice President of Product at UIPath. He focused on attending automation and driving the A Robot for Every Person initiative. Before joining UIPath, Brandon ran operations for a top 50 independent mortgage lender where he was a UIPath customer. He takes a holistic approach to digital transformation that brings humans and technology together seamlessly. So Brandon, if you could please turn on your camera and join us. We look forward to your presentation.
Great, thanks very much. You know, it's really great to be here today talking about a robot for every person. I'll start the presentation in a moment here, but just wanted to take a quick moment, one, to talk a little bit about where we're at right now with hyperautomation and define a couple terms that I think will be helpful as we start to get into the presentation and talk about what a robot for every person really means. So the first one is this hyperautomation term, and it's really helpful in describing this holistic approach that you mentioned, because it's no longer just about automation. It's no longer about automating something behind the scenes. It's now really about an integrated approach with robots, with humans, with ERPs, with the classic systems that we're using, and bringing these all together. And it's not enough to just bring them together. We've got to do it fast. And when I say fast, I mean, we've got customers right now starting a project on Monday, deploying it and using it on Friday. So throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about a robot for every person and how we engage people, how we take these tools and these practices. Marco in the previous presentation did an amazing job talking about their journey through RPA and their learnings. And now, how do you pivot from that into a place where people and robots collectively are redefining work? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get right into it. So as mentioned, I was a customer before I joined UiPath, and I went through my own journey and understanding how RPA fit in with my digital transformation initiatives, how RPA connected with our ERP, our lending systems, things like that. And now we're gonna back away for a minute from business productivity and integration and really talk about the personal productivity story. So from a personal productivity standpoint, we can rewind the clock a little bit and look at how some major innovations and tools change the way that we work. And Pocket Calculator, you can't get any more simple than that these days. But at the time, it was extremely innovative. You are no longer using slide rules, manual calculations that you're writing out in long form. You can do the same work you did before, but now you have the ability to do it much faster, much more accurate. Same with the PC. We're getting rid of typewriters. We're moving from a world where you have to order your sentences and your paragraphs in a linear way, and now you can move things around, cut and paste, drag and drop. Again, we're doing the same work, but it's supercharged. We have this ability to move well beyond the limitations that were put on us before. The internet comes along. We're no longer sending memos, or we don't need to courier things unless they need a wet signature. The ability to interact is happening much faster. Now, with each of these innovations, not only do we go faster at what we're doing, but we also redefine, right? New opportunities are opened up in terms of commerce. The mobile phone comes along. Now we're in a place where we don't have to be at a specific place at a specific time to interact, right? So there's this theme, these things that we all take for granted now. We can't even imagine a world where we don't have the internet and a mobile phone, but it wasn't that long ago that businesses were doing just fine without these technologies. But when these technologies came onto the scene, they fundamentally changed how people interacted with technology and how they did their jobs. Now, robot assistance is the next major technology that is changing the way that we do our jobs. And this presentation is really going to focus around how this comes to life, what controls you need to put in place. I loved how Marco in the last session was talking about governance and making sure that you have procedures in an appropriate way to bring this to life. I've always said good fences make good neighbors, right? You must have those guardrails, and we're going to talk about those guardrails. But at the end of the day, what we're striving for is to put the power of automation into the hands directly of people so that they can change how they do work, and that's going to change their overall productivity. So let's take a look at, for a minute, what it means. What is a robot for every person? Well, it's inclusive of the UiPath platform, but I'm going to suggest that at the very top of that stack are a couple principles. The first is enabling people to use robots, to consume automations, and we're going to talk about these personas. The second is people building their own automations. Marco talked about citizen development. We're going to explore that term, what it means, and what you need to do in order to bring that safely, responsibly into your organization. And then under these two actions is a myriad of capabilities, from process discovery to AI integration to monitoring and reporting on what's happening. We're going to talk a little bit about that too. So what happens when people start to have the ability to design and execute their automations? Well, it's a similar story to what we've heard in the past with RPA. It's faster, right? It's more reliable, but more accuracy. But now that we're taking some of these tasks away from people, you get to be more creative and collaborative. You get to focus on more higher value tasks, right? These tasks that get automated are not the tasks that get people promoted. These are the tasks that are expected, that likely you don't get much thanks for when they get done. But if they don't get done correctly, it's a big problem. The first task that I automated, ordering appraisals. Nobody ever said, great job ordering an appraisal, right? But if it didn't happen, that was a major problem. So we're going to talk about offloading these lower value tasks so people can be freed up. From an IT, from a business perspective, we can also look at what happens when you have a robot on every desktop, when you have a robot for every person. Well, the first thing is you have this delivery vehicle for digital transformation. I talked a minute ago about creating a process or starting the process on Monday, finishing and deploying the process on Friday. I wasn't being flippant. That is a real use case that happened as part of a COVID effort just a couple months ago. So when you have this delivery mechanism, the infrastructure in place, it allows you to be very quick and deliberate in what you're going to roll out. Another thing that I'm going to talk about is the third box here, and giving your workforce the modern tools that they demand. We had a great session webinar a couple weeks ago with Dentsu, and we talked about how employees coming into the workforce have these visions, this imagination of the work that they're going to be doing, and it's not timesheets. It's not the low-level tasks that are just the necessary evils of our work. It's being creative and innovative. So robots give us the ability to deliver on those expectations and take those lower-level tasks off the table. So next, let's look at an example. And admittedly, this example has some flaws, but that's okay. We're going to talk about it and then pivot into how to start making it real. So in this example, we're going to do some straight line math. What's the value of 20 minutes to your organization? So if we were to do, and this is particularly relevant in America, but in different regions of the world, we can adjust, a $35 an hour employee, if we can take 20 minutes out of that day, that's about $3,000 a year in savings. And when we expand it to the entire organization, let's say have 10,000 employees, we're looking at 30 million. Now you might say, for some employees, that number will be a lot higher, and I would agree. This is just a straight line math example. And you might also say, when I have an employee that is a salaried employee, what happens to those 20 minutes? It certainly doesn't come back in terms of a cost savings. And to that, let's get into how you start setting objectives for your organization and bring the value of a robot for every person to life. And the place that we start is with your goals, right? Your goals will be unique to you and your industry, and how you measure those goals will link back to your RPA implementation. So for me as a customer, my goal was to scale faster. We had an objective to be a top 50 mortgage lender, and in order to do that, I couldn't just throw bodies at it. I couldn't just hire more and more people. I had to scale. I had to make them more efficient. So we saw about 125% of efficiency increase, so 225 total, by automating those lower level tasks. So for me, it was a scale story. For someone else, it might be a cost story, or it might be a customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and maybe a combination of these things. So getting clear on what you want to accomplish, what your high level objectives for the organization are critical for how you roll out a robot for every person, because you're going to target those types of processes and those areas of the business where you can make an impact. So a question that I get asked often is, all right, for the changes that I'm going to make here, what are some examples of processes that I'm going to do? And I'll suggest here a few different categories. First, personal productivity. We have a great process. We of course use our own product internally, and we have a great process written by a colleague of mine in the product team that handles an out of office setup. And you might think that that's trivial, but as you go through it, it actually looks at your calendar, it looks at what conflicts that you have, and allows you to resolve all of them as part of the process, as well as submit that out of office request. It's extremely helpful. You might also implement something to check your 401k balance, or any other HR system that you have, requesting time off or checking your balances. These start and stop my day processes are very popular. You'd be amazed at how many people begin their day by logging in to 5 or 9 different systems and getting prepared for that. There's no value in that. That's just a check the box activity. Very specific departmental activities, including HR processes, and we'll see a demo of a few of those here in a minute, as well as training and enablement, and being able to guide people through the processes that you've set out for them by literally exposing guidance on top of the applications that they're using to reduce training costs and do on-the-job training. So this is not an inclusive list. These are just a couple different categories to think about when you think about automation, when you think about how people will use automation, and where should you focus. So with that, let's take a look at 3 of the tools that we use in a robot for every person, and these are 3 business user tools, and these tools again are built on our end-to-end automation platform, powered by all of the hyper automation objectives that we have. And I'll go ahead and start that video now. Let's look at how UiPath is rebooting work with our vision for a robot for every person. UiPath Assistant, Studio X, and Automation Hub are 3 of the products that make our vision of a robot for every person a reality. Let's see how they work together to fundamentally change the way we look at work. UiPath Assistant is software that runs locally on your computer. It's like a mini you that can do everything from managing your calendar to filing complex tax returns. In this example, I'm an HR manager, and I start every day with an inbox full of resumes. Matching candidates to job openings is time-consuming and boring. Now imagine that I have my own personal robot assistant to handle this while I focus on more valuable and urgent work. My day starts with a reminder that my assistant is ready to review new resumes. When I start the process, the assistant launches a new copy of my desktop so I can carry on with my tasks without losing my mouse and keyboard. As the robot reviews each resume, it finds the best matching positions and sends an email response. If something unexpected happens, like an extra email attachment, I can take over the robot's desktop and choose the best document for the review. Then I can go back to my work. Once the robot finishes, I can see the sent emails with personalized job matches for each candidate. Now that you've seen how to work with a robot assistant, let's look at creating my own personal automations with StudioX. StudioX gives people with no coding experience the ability to automate their tasks. Here's how it works. Every day, I onboard new employees. As part of the process, I download an Excel file, then visit a website to create a temporary password for each new hire. To automate this, I'll use StudioX to tell the robot to open the Excel spreadsheet. From here, the StudioX recorder will observe how I create a new password without me writing any code. Then, I'll tell the robot to save the password back to the temporary password column in the spreadsheet. Finally, I'll want to review the emails before they are sent in case I want to add a personal note. I'll show the robot how to create an email draft with the personalized password we just created for each new hire. Now, let's see our automation in action. When I click Run, the robot starts working. Once it is done, we can see it filled the Excel spreadsheet with a password for each new hire and created the draft emails for my review. Now let's take a look at how all of these automations are managed within my company. Automation Hub is where your company collaborates to define and build innovative new automations. In the previous onboarding example, after I'm finished in StudioX, I want to share with others in my department so they can be more effective also. I can submit my automation for approval from my Center of Excellence, or COE. I can even suggest new ideas for the COE to build for me. After I provide all the information, the COE will review and assess my entry and the StudioX file and then distribute it to other HR managers after seeing that it meets their governance standards. Once the COE has approved and distributed my automation, I will see it added to my UIPath assistant, and I can now run that automation at the beginning of my day, just like I did for the resume reviewer. Now you've seen how a few of the products in the 20.4 release come together to bring a robot for every person to life. Excellent. So I hope that gave you a very quick look at what, sorry about that, we might have lost screen there for a minute. So I hope that gave you a quick look at some of the tools that are available. And we'll talk a bit about personas here in a minute and how people are using those tools in concert. And while I showed you 3 tools there, one of the things that I hear from our customers is they appreciate how the full set of automation capabilities are together in one platform. And while a business user may use those 3 tools, there's another collection of ways to consume automation even within the applications you're already using, or to build custom apps to consume automations, while your COE is using the controls and the overall governance framework in order to make sure it happens appropriately. And we'll talk about that. So let's use the people, process, technology paradigm. I think people are very familiar with that, comfortable with that. And if we start looking at a robot for every person, broken down by that, then we first have to talk about who are these personas and what tools are they using. We'll talk about governance and how you create the appropriate rails that this program can ride on, and as well as some of the technology components. So with that, let's take a look at our personas first. We have 3 types of activities here: people who consume automations, who are the beneficiary of automations, people who are creating automations, and people who are controlling the process, controlling the program. So our consumers are automation users, and they are running UiPath Assistant, as you saw. They have the processes loaded on their PCs. They can start them, schedule them, whatever the case may be, in order to free up that time and focus on other things. They can also contribute back to the organization through Automation Hub and suggest new automations. In fact, customers that are embracing this robot for every person vision are seeing that bottoms-up approach as a very key element of this program and of their automation practice. So we have two types of citizen developers. The first are self-users. These are people who have no coding experience. They maybe, they're comfortable, familiar with Excel, but they don't know what a variable is. They don't know how to modularize code, let's say. And then we have our power users. And our power users are people, maybe they have had a coding class, or they've just learned through using Studio or Studio X, which is our citizen developer profile, how to be efficient, and they want to take it to the next level. They may be building out automations for their department, things that can be reused. And then you have your RPA developers. And this is what we have today in almost every company with RPA, right? Professional, classically trained, or just people who are very good and have picked up RPA as they've gone along. And then finally, we have our COE. And the COE, again, is governing, is controlling, it's reviewing the submissions, making sure that the rules are being followed. These aren't, of course, the only personas in an RPA setup. These are the primary ones to think about when you're talking about a robot for every person. So let's see them in action. We've got and now we're getting into the process conversation. We have the classic top-down model here. The COE leads the automations. They have a backlog. And in the case of a robot for every person, they could be building out attended automations that they'll push down to the individual's computer, just like you saw in the demo at the very end there. The second approach is this bottom-up approach. And within this, you see the citizen developers starting to use the Studio X and tools to automate things that they just have an idea about, a hunch about. They may record a process, as you saw, or develop it directly. And in doing so, they'll create examples of automations that can then be sent to the COE. The hybrid approach is really where we want to be. That is the sweet spot. That is where you get the power of aligning business objectives with your automation program, prioritizing the backlog, pushing down those automations, but also listening to the citizen developers and getting fed by them. We have a customer on our customer advisory board who said, I didn't expect that we would get a lot of really great submissions initially, but it was only the sixth or the seventh submission that came in that generated enormous amounts of savings, and it wasn't on anybody's radar, because the people that are doing the job, that are in the trenches on a day-by-day basis, they have insight that your COE just may not have. So that combination of top-down and bottom-up approach is really critical. So let's take a look at it. How would this happen using the tools that we talked about? Well, in the top-down approach, you are going to be managing your backlog in Automation Hub. You're going to be prioritizing it. And when you're ready to implement, you're going to use Studio to build an automation, and that RPA developer will build it. You'll distribute it through Orchestrator, and ultimately it will be consumed by your automation users, either in the UiPath Assistant or in apps or in an embedded experience where, let's say you wanted somebody to start an automation from an ERP or from a custom tool that you have. You can do that. You can embed UiPath into your existing systems. The other side of this is the bottoms-up approach. So a citizen developer, either a self-user or a power user, has an idea. They build it out in Studio X, and about the time that they feel like this idea has merit, they can submit it to Automation Hub. And from there, the COE will review it, maybe make some changes. The nice thing about Studio X is that you can open a Studio X file in Studio, so a business user can create an automation with the very low code, no code environment, but a professional RPA developer can open that project in Studio and maybe add some additional information, some additional logging, some robustness, some error handling before distributing out to users. And then again, once that is distributed, now you've got that same ability to consume those automations. So bringing this all together, whether the automation starts in the citizen developer framework or it starts in the COE, both of these paths go through the COE before they get distributed. They go through the COE to be reviewed, possibly modified, and then appropriately distributed out to the people that are going to use them. So let's talk about value for a minute, because if I'm critical of myself and the presentation, I would say that's great, but how does this hit the bottom line, right? How do I take all of this potential to automate, to reduce time and effort, and how do I actually show that it's working? Well, again, going back to that slide earlier about where the value comes from, it all starts with what objective you're trying to satisfy. So if it's a cost savings and efficiency, then we're really going to be looking at those labor costs and packing more into a shorter amount of time, trying to, in a call center, reduce that average handle time, trying to increase those first call resolutions, right? These are the metrics that show the impact that they're having. From a quality time, we're talking about the compliance and accuracy. In my example about ordering appraisals, the appraisal ordering process is only a 6-minute process. It's not a huge time savings, but when you take a look at the elimination of rework and of delays that it can have on loans and the impact that it can have on a delayed loan, that 6 minutes is not the main story. The main story is really one of customer satisfaction and compliance. And that leads us to customer satisfaction. We have a customer that recently rolled out a process, and the first time I heard it, the results were all about average handle time and first call resolutions, right? It was in a call center. It was all very bottom line. But later, after doing some longer term study, they found out that it wasn't just about that. It was also their employee engagement scores were significantly higher for that group that was interacting with these automations, as well as their customer satisfaction scores coming off of these calls was very high. So now you get to this point where we're starting to see multiple objectives being fulfilled by a single process or by a single program. Another question that I get is, who's doing this? Why, give me examples of customers that are embracing this vision. And a couple customers that really have been doing this for a while now are PwC and Ericsson. Both have taken a very robust approach to their automation practices. In PwC, it's giving the ability to create automations to every person within the organization in the Americas, and or I should say in America. And in Ericsson, it was really about taking RPA and embedding it into their already very robust digital transformation program. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about UiPath. We use our own tools. Every employee in UiPath has that digital assistant, the UiPath assistant that you saw. We distribute processes to every employee that, as I talked earlier about the out-of-office reply that I use all the time. We have to learn from ourselves, and we have to try out these governance tools and processes in order to make sure that they're best in class. So governance is a theme that keeps on coming up, and it's a question that I get asked all the time from our customers. And again, if we use the people, process, technology framework to start breaking it down, then from a people standpoint, we look at governance as not only the organization, how you group people or how you define these users, but also what processes do you already have in place from a governance standpoint. Well, you've got your HR policies. It's not okay to create a robot that does something nefarious. That's an extension of you. That's delegated authority. It's your responsibility. So we have to look at the people and the programs that we already have. From the process standpoint, we make decisions around credentials. Does the robot have its own credential? Are we using the user's credential? Depending on the use case, you may want to approach that differently. From a technology standpoint, I showed you 3 of the tools that we used in that demo, but we also have Orchestrator, which is really the brains of the entire operation, right? Controlling, licensing, interacting with every robot that's deployed, and every robot reporting back the robot logs so you can monitor what's being done. As well, when we look at performance, making sure that the processes are actually truly taking time out of the employee's day. So bringing these together, these people, processes, technology, you will build a governance structure that makes sense for your organization. You'll take either a partner's framework and apply it, overlay it, or you'll take framework concepts from what we have out of the box and use that directly. And you'll come up ultimately with a structure that meets your organizational goals and existing processes. Finally, we've got this platform that I keep talking about, right? What is it? How does it work? Well, we really break our platform and our tools down into 6 major areas, and it starts with discovering opportunities. And for this, we talked about Automation Hub already. We've got process mining, which is a way to mine your applications and see what is commonly being done to get ideas about what to automate. And when you have those ideas formulated, you put them into Automation Hub, you score them, you prioritize them. Now you're building that backlog, right? And we talked about Studio X and Studio as being places where you create those automations. Studio X being a no-code platform, and Studio, same program, just different profiles that you're opening up. Studio having much more capabilities in that, and Studio Pro even more beyond that. Studio Pro is really where we get into our test platform and being able to build out your testing infrastructure. On the managed side, we've got Orchestrator, as I mentioned before, but also cloud options, as well as AI integrations. Some of my favorite examples right now are attended automations that actually use an AI or an ML model as part of that automation seamlessly. For instance, if you have a model already built around payment terms, or in the finance space and mortgage space, certainly, you may have models that help you optimize how to structure a deal. Those can be referenced immediately in those attended automations. We of course talked about the execution side on how we run those automations. And from an engagement standpoint, we have different ways for you to consume those automations. Even unattended automations that all you need to do is just handle an exception. That's great. We've got an action center tool, a site that helps you simply quickly handle those exceptions without a lot of overhead. And finally, insights. We have to be able to measure all of this. We talked about the KPIs at the very end. It's not enough just to do great work in an automation program. You have to show how it benefited the organization. And that's really where insights comes into play. So with that final slide, where do I get started? I'd suggest three main themes, paradigms. You have to get the foundation set from the executive, C-suite down. What are we trying to accomplish? Get that strategy, that operational model in place, and move on then to establishing your key processes. How are you going to measure the volume? Make sure that your business intake process is healthy. You're going to be identifying these processes and stoking that backlog. This is where our control frameworks come into play, and automation readiness. And finally, build that path for growth. I loved how Marco said they focused on their unattended practice first, and they're looking at citizen development. That's excellent, right? Everybody's going to start with a different configuration, start at a different place, and pick the place that is most going to create the most amount of value for your organization. And the only caveat that I give to that is be aware that an automation program will create as much value as the box that you put it in, like a goldfish. You give a goldfish a small tank, it only grows to be a little goldfish. You give it a big tank, it keeps growing, right? Same thing with this automation practice. If you give it a big runway with meaty goals for cost savings and expansion, it will expand and deliver on that. If you start small with a little set of objectives, it will deliver within that set of objectives. So be aware that how you start your journey will ultimately influence how much value you're getting out of your RPA practice and the citizen developer model. So with that, I would say that probably concludes the presentation part, the most boring part of our time today. I may have an audio challenge.
No,
Oh, there
yeah,
we go.
I had myself muted. So that's great. Great presentation, excellent insights. Really appreciate that. We had lots of questions come in, Brandon. So these are very practical, no nonsense type of questions, and I know you're ready for them. And I'm going to start with a very tough one right off the bat. If we have a robot for every person, we may not be able to afford it, because the old joke on the old RPA is that we're deploying $15,000 robots to solve $5,000 problems. And that really, as you've been in the industry, and that really created kind of a backlash to a certain extent. And I know that UIPath and the work that you do understands the value that you bring and the right opportunities for robot deployment. But tell us a little bit about how has that cost perspective evolved for the industry, and how you're assessing the right opportunities to deploy robots. Are the costs of robots coming down over time? If you can just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this topic because I think it is. You're absolutely right. In any enterprise automation that you do, in any enterprise system, you've got to look at the ROI, and you've got to look at what's going to happen because of the choices that you make. So to start with, when we talk about a robot for every person, you can only imagine this is not a linear cost model, right? You don't take the list price of an attended robot and just multiply it by 40,000 people. But luckily that's beyond the scope of my expertise. Your salesperson, your partner will be able to work with you to see what a robot for every person model would look like, and what that means in terms of cost. And you can only imagine that it's a significant decrease as like we see in just about every software model as those volumes go up. But the other part of your question is still very valid, right? A $15,000 robot to solve a $5,000 problem. I have two thoughts on this. The first is, sometimes we get a little narrow focused when we think about what we're trying to accomplish. We've got a use case, one or two use cases, and we think we're gonna put in this infrastructure in order to solve it. And for one use case, you may find that the returns aren't quite as high as what you're expecting. But remember, the robot and the orchestrator, this is a platform. It's not one use case. You should be thinking 10 use cases, 20 use cases, right? You hear customers, and even in the series, talk about hundreds of use cases, right? So your return on investment is not linear in the opposite direction, right? And as you are adding more processes, that return starts sloping up and keeps sloping up with scale. So, many customers can get the ROI on just one process, but the real power in this is that scale.
And Zenkenda asked a number of questions related to the UiPath approach, and she's curious if she's a client looking at all the different offerings in the marketplace right now. What separates UiPath? What is the distinctive advantage that UiPath, in terms of its model, in terms of its interaction, what really separates it in the marketplace?
Yeah, we'd probably need a whole session to really dig into this one, but I'll tell you a couple things that caused me to join UiPath, right? First is the openness of the company and of the platform. We don't obscure our roadmap. We put it out there and we talk about what's coming. From a training standpoint, we were putting out how to train yourself videos for years now. In fact, that's how I got started. I over Christmas break, I couldn't shut my brain down, started watching the UiPath videos and doing my own POC, essentially. So the culture and the product is one of openness. We are an extensible platform. If you have code that you've already written, you can bring that code into a process. We're not asking people to do it our way and only our way. We're saying, here's what the capabilities are. Take, like Ericsson did, take these principles, take these processes, these capabilities, and fit them into your framework, and use as much of it as makes sense. Strategically use the parts that you want to.
That's excellent, Brandon. Lots of questions about how the industry is evolving. In your assessment, in the past, if you look back in the last 12 months, what has happened that you think is most critical, the biggest development in the industry in the last 12 months?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there's so much. I mean, this is an industry that is reinventing itself so quickly. You really have to be immersed in it in order to keep up. I would say within the last 12 months, when I joined UiPath 2.5 years ago, seems like an eternity at this point, it was, there are narratives around the fragility of processes. If a system breaks, then my automations break, and we are tackling questions like change management, things that seem very basic right now. As we have moved through these last 2.5 years, these same themes aren't applying. Now the themes we're talking about is scale. How do I get to 50,000 people, right? How these giant numbers? And it's not just about the technology, it's about the enablement and the training and bringing people along for the journey and getting people excited about it. So I'd say the biggest thing that we've shifted from is really a focus on nuts and bolts technology bits to how big can you go, how quickly can you go. And as an example, when I was a customer, it took me weeks to set up Orchestrator and get my own network and my topology figured out. You can set up Orchestrator now in 2 minutes by going to our web platform. So it's not about the nuts and bolts anymore. Those are important, but they're understood and they've been accounted for in the process. It's about scale. It's about moving fast, getting people trained up, engaged, and executing. You might be on mute. Sorry, you might be on mute.
Yeah, I was muted. It was my fault. I apologize. Cameron has a great question here, and we'll try to get it done in a minute, but I think it's a very deep question. But if you can summarize to us, he's talking about the hybrid mode that you explained. It's a really interesting approach. And he thinks that it takes a greater level of organizational maturity and adoption of process automation to make the hybrid mode work. And his question really is that if you use in your deployment any kind of process automation maturity model that takes into account the maturity of the processes in the organization, if you can share a typical timeline for progression over these maturity models of processes, and in a nutshell, how do you interact with different organizations which are at different stages of process maturity?
Yeah, you're right. That is a meaty question. It's great. So a couple things. One, UiPath, we have our own maturity model that we use with our customers that helps identify where areas of opportunity and deficiency are based on the size of implementation. Our partners as well do an incredible job at this same thing, at being able to assess where you're at in your journey and what needs to happen. Now, the assessment is great, but it's just the opening argument, right? Now you get into the meat of the case. And once you have that maturity assessment and you understand where you are, then you choose. You either start prioritizing based on deficiency. I have 2 developers, I need 6. I have 1 department doing citizen development, I need 7 different departments, right? Or you look at those areas of strengths and you double down and you pick up a partner to help with those deficiencies. I'm going to outsource. Instead of hiring those 4 more developers, I'm going to start with a partner that has the ability to help bolster that development skills, and I'm going to focus on strategy, or vice versa. So understanding where you're at, being able to leverage UiPath, our partner organization, to either augment that in the short term, and then you look at the long term. Where do I want to be in order to do this? Do I want to start with development being outsourced, and then move to a fully developers, and then use that outsourcing model for maintenance? That's very common. Start moving that partner into more of a strategic role now that you've got the basic blocking and tackling done. That happens. So I would say those 3 parts: where am I now? Where do I want to focus on my deficiencies or my strengths, and then figure out opportunities to complement that, and then understand where you want to be, and work with UiPath, work with your partners in order to make sure that everything you do in that medium term is mapping towards those long-term goals.
Outstanding, Brandon. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to have an industry leader like you sharing your knowledge, your passion about the development and continued growth of RPA in our industry. So thank you very much for being here with us today and doing a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. I've loved this series so far. I think you guys have done an outstanding job, and it's really a pleasure and honor to be part of it.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we'll conclude our session. We're going to start back up at the top of the hour. And quick reminders, submit your feedback as you close the session. Also, June 23rd through June 25th, you do not want to miss IBPM Live. And you can find more information and register for those sessions at ibpmlive.online. And coming up next, to complete our RPA and Intelligent Automation series, we're going to welcome Riaz Attar, Vice President for Caesars Entertainment, where he will give us an incredibly practical view of how to use RPA to create millions of dollars in value. So you do not want to miss that. I will see you back up at the top of the hour. Thank you.